A lot of different efforts to diversify trade that ultimately resulted in the same portion of our goods and services heading to the United States today as did 5 years ago or 10 years ago, give or take a couple of percentage points, 3/4 of what we send.
Is this a bribe? Because it kind of feels like a bribe, to be honest with you. It also reminds me a lot of something that happened back in 2014. I'm Jasmine Lane. This is Over Opinionated. Subscribe, follow, like, and comment your thoughts down below. Mainstream media, by all accounts, appears to be turning their back on Mark Carney and the Liberals. There's some scandals and information and things that don't make sense that are just getting way too big for them to ignore. But then Mark Carney gave them a nice little offer today. And I'm actually very curious to see how this changes things in the weeks leading up to the election. Mark Carney got hounded multiple times as well. And Pierre Poilievre made some pretty major announcements, which we will get to. First and foremost, Joe Rogan actually clarified his stance on Canada after receiving some backlash over his previous one. So let's just listen to that. It's with the two hosts from Trigonometry.
I don't know. I just want to say to the Canadian people, because I said the other day that I don't go to Canada anymore. I'd rather go to Russia. I was joking around, first of all, but I do not go to Canada anymore. But it's because of the government. It has nothing to do with the people. I think the people are lovely. They're some of my favorite people of all time. Canadian people, I think, are 20% less douchey than Americans. I would say that. It's like Canada's like America, but 20% less douchebags. They're the nicest people. They're well educated. It's a great population. Montreal's amazing. Toronto's amazing. I love Canada. But when you start closing people's bank accounts because they donated to a trucker convoy and no one's up in arms about that. You're donating to a bunch of people that are protesting and they close your bank account? That's crazy suppression of expression. That's scary stuff. That's like you're going to get locked up stuff. That's like the next step of that is imprison you for protesting something that you have every right to protest.
And actually, just an update on that, this happened yesterday. Both Chris and Tamara had been found not guilty on almost all of their charges. They were both instead found guilty of committing mischief, which, I mean, after an over a year-long trial, wow, what a waste of taxpayer dollars. And apparently, Crown prosecutors have signaled that they are seeking jail time. The pair are going to be sentenced later this year, and the maximum penalty for mischief is 10 years. You know, the only thing I have to say about this, though, is if you're going to set a precedent, you have to set that same precedent for all. So if this is the precedent you're setting, you want to use them as an example, okay, great. Every single other person needs to be held to that same example then. And according to Statistics Canada, 33,000 jobs were lost in the month of March, and unemployment rose to 6.7%. This is actually the biggest monthly job loss since January of 2022. A lot of this, of course, is due to the uncertainty revolving around Donald Trump and the tariffs and businesses who are laying people off and not investing because it's a very unpredictable market at the moment.
I've asked Prime Minister Carney on multiple occasions, he needs to reach out. He said he would reach out at the highest levels with President Xi and his government to find a path and to commit to finding a path to a tariff-free environment when it comes to canola oil and canola meal. This is a significant market for Saskatchewan, as all of our markets are for our Saskatchewan products. Second, we're reaching out at the subnational level, again, to advocate and educate on the importance of accessing these products from Saskatchewan and why that matters. We've reached out to not only the Canadian ambassador to China, but also the Chinese ambassador to Canada, and are looking at, you know, how can we advocate with subnational leaders within the country of China. But we need that engagement from the federal level, from when my understanding has not occurred yet. And so I ask for it again.
It is absolutely insane to me that Team Canada does not care at all about 100% tariffs from China that is really affecting our farmers in the prairies right now, among others. But they care so much about Trump tariffs, even though Canada was largely exempt from them. Don't get me wrong, they're still making an impact, but wow, the silence is deafening, truly. But, you know, it makes perfect sense when you think about the fact that the Liberals, Mark Carney, well, they don't actually really have to care about any of this stuff because they're so rich, it doesn't actually affect them, right? So Mark Carney was on an interview last night, and this might actually be one of the worst answers ever given in political history. He was asked in French if he was going to stop buying American strawberries, essentially, you know, because we're supporting Canada, as he says we should all be doing. Cancel your trips, support Canada. And this is what he responded. I'll recap it for you in English in case you're just listening through audio.
Est-ce que vous en achetez encore des produits américains? Est-ce que vous achetez des fraises des États-Unis? Vous envoyez fraises des États-Unis?
OK. Je dois vous donner une réponse bizarre, dans un sens bizarre, parce que étant Premier ministre, je n'achète plus des fraises et tout cela. Quelqu'un le fait.
I mean, first and foremost, it's kind of funny asking Mark Carney, do you still buy American? Are you still going to buy American strawberries? And before we get into something else pretty major here, Mark Carney then responded by essentially saying that he doesn't buy strawberries because he's prime minister now, so people do his grocery shopping for him. Which what were you trying to do there? Was that like a weird ego flex that came out wrong? And it's true, yes, as prime minister, people do your grocery shopping for you. But what a weird tone-deaf thing to say right now. Like, you literally are on camera talking about how horrible the threat from the United States is to Canada, how bad all of this is, and how it's going to hurt everybody so bad. And then when asked about if you yourself have stopped buying American, you say, I don't even do my own grocery shopping. You don't say no either, by the way. You say, I have somebody who grocery shops for me because I'm prime minister. The answer there should have just been, instead of trying to have this weird little flex moment, the answer should have been no, which obviously we know is not true. Mark Carney has not boycotted the United States, despite telling Canadians to. His investments, almost all of them, are in the United States. Brookfield Asset Management, as an example, invested more in the United States in the last year and actually started to seize their investments in Canada. They moved their headquarters over to New York City. And also, there's this.
Shares of Brookfield Infrastructure Partners are seeing some pressure in pre-market trading. The company has agreed to acquire Colonial Enterprises in a deal valued at $9 billion US.
Now, a lot of people will say, okay, great, that's something that happened. But, you know, Mark Carney, he's not a part of Brookfield anymore. And yes, that is true. He has stepped aside for now. However, obviously a deal like this was happening way before this election was called. And Mark Carney, as chair, vice chair, would have definitely been involved in that decision to buy this pipeline in the United States, which, by the way, is the largest U.S. pipeline for $9 billion, despite him also maintaining the ban on pipeline and resource development here in Canada.
Judy Trin, CTV News. Good morning, Mr. Carney. You were at the helm of a company that quite clearly registered much of its business in Bermuda to avoid paying taxes, including, as CTV News reported, registered to an address of a bike shop in Bermuda. You have said that this is the way the world works, and that in the case of pension funds, that leaves more money for pensioners. But in this case, it looks like just plain tax avoidance. This may be a legal practice, and as you say, as the world works, but is it ethical, Mr. Carney?
First off, I'm no longer at Brookfield. Secondly, this follows their arrangements follow the rules, including the tax rules of this country, other countries. And thirdly, as you mentioned in your question, that the structure is organized so that Canadian pension funds can get the most benefit for the pensioners, which are teachers, retired first responders, and public servants. Thank you.
If you have to explain something to me because it doesn't make sense, and you have to try to use like trigger emotional words such as, oh, it's the pension plans for nurses and teachers, it probably just doesn't actually make sense. And if having offshore tax havens made sense, well, then it would make sense that all of us had them, right? And we don't. In fact, it's usually very, very wealthy elite people who have things like that. But nonetheless, apparently, I'm just an idiot who does not know how the world works.
You did not really respond to the question as to your opinion as to where, if it was ethical, but let me follow up on that. You wrote a book, Values. The thesis of that book was that capitalism or markets left to their own devices don't help humanity. For years, your party, the Liberal Party, has promised to stop the practice of tax avoidance that Brookfield and other companies have engaged in. Do you have the tools to do that? You said so. When are you going to release and tell Canadians what those tools are, and when will you implement them?
In terms of having a fair tax system in Canada, including for corporate taxation, it's absolutely a priority of my government. If we are re-elected, it'd be a priority of our government to ensure that our companies are paying their fair share of taxes, and that, above all, that those taxes that are at the resources that are at the disposal of the government, that they're being put in place for the purposes that Canadians want.
I think what you were trying to say, Mr. Carney, is that the tax system in Canada really sucks for big corporations, people who have millions of dollars, billions, trillions of dollars of investments. And that is, in fact, why they oftentimes will go to the lengths of using offshore tax havens. That is, in fact, why they will not invest in the country of Canada. And I guess, thank you for giving Pierre Poilievre a massive endorsement here when it comes to our taxpayer dollars and what it is that they're used for.
So the money we spend on research will go to research, not to promoting political ideologies. We want, for example, our science and technology research to go into technological breakthroughs, inventions, innovations, discoveries, cures for terrible diseases that can improve Canadian lives. That is what Canadians expect their tax dollars to go to, not to spend it on radical political ideologies that are, first of all, completely out of touch with the values of Canadians, and second of all, have no scientific value to our people.
This is probably the biggest difference when I'm actually factoring in all of the promises made from the Conservative platform compared to the Liberal platform. It all comes down to money and logic. So we've had the Liberal Party being advised financially under Mark Carney for the last 5 years that we know of. The Liberal Party has been in our life for 10 years. And in that period of time, every single list, Canada has slowly fallen. And why have we fallen? It's not because we don't have all of the resources imaginable. It is, in fact, because they have put ideology, virtue signaling, perhaps you could say, over economic sustainability. And it's just really crazy. You hear the Liberals making all of these promises of supports, but not any promises of things that will dramatically increase our revenue stream into this country, things that will encourage investment. They haven't talked about anything like that at all.
Canada must be looking elsewhere to expand our trade, to build our economy, and to protect our sovereignty. Canada is ready to take a leadership role in building a coalition of like-minded countries who share our values. We believe in international cooperation. We believe in the free and open exchange of goods, services, and ideas. And if the United States no longer wants to lead, Canada will. Canada is strengthening our trading relationships with reliable partners. In this new world, we have to look out for ourselves, and because we are Canadian, we will always look out for each other.
All of those things sound really nice, right? Albeit maybe kind of scary if you know how the world works, like Mark Carney claims to. But at the end of the day, the Liberals keep parading around as though they are some economic savior. In fact, Mark Carney lied about it again yesterday.
The financial crisis, 2008-9, when I was governor, we avoided a recession. We're now in recession with GDP projected to fall by 1.2% this year.
So you're saying that the relationship, the trading relationship with Canada and the US is over because Trump is pushing for free trade and lower tariffs. That, by all accounts, is exactly what this is about, right? And then instead of saying, we are going to renegotiate these deals, we're going to have more free trade with the United States and just be done with all of this, you say that our relationship with the U.S. is done and you're going to be the leader in the economy now? Canada has absolutely everything that everybody wants, right? We got oil, gas, fertilizer, critical minerals, food, but not a single one of those matters when you have a government who refuses to unleash it.
For a number of years, I've covered CETA, I've covered the Indo-Pacific strategy, a lot of different efforts to diversify trade that ultimately resulted in the same portion of our goods and services heading to the United States today as did 5 years ago or 10 years ago, give or take a couple of percentage points. 3/4 of what we send, no matter what your government did to try and amplify trade with other countries, still goes to the United States. So what new plan will you put forward to Canadians to do the opposite? And why should Canadians trust that your government can do that when it hasn't been able to over the last decade?
Actually, we are the only G7 country that has a free trade agreement with every other G7 country. So the first step is going to be to leverage each and every one of those trading relationships. The second step is going to look internally and make sure that we are dismantling internal barriers to trade, which could add up to $200 billion to the Canadian economy. So there are steps that we will take immediately as a result of the very devastating announcement relating to tariffs that President Trump has made over the last number of weeks. But make no mistake, this is about reordering trade relationships. This is about developing stronger trading relationships within Canada and with other partners. And that's exactly what this moment requires us to do. Regardless of the decisions that the United States is taking, this moment signifies a time where we need to broaden our trade relationships and leverage.
The problem here is not Donald Trump. Mark Carney even said that Canada's economy was in bad standing before Donald Trump tariffs. He said that like 2 weeks ago. The problem here is the Liberal government. But they're trying to run on making you terrified of Trump. And it honestly just feels like such a trick because they want you to vote for them, not because they're going to repeal any of the laws that have put us in this situation in the first place. They're not going to repeal the No New Pipelines law. They're not repealing any of that stuff that's going to help us be more independent when it comes to trade from the United States. They're instead going to keep all of those laws, and then they want you to vote them in because even though those are all staying the same, they're going to give you subsidies. They are going to give you handouts. It's symptom versus cause thinking. You are not addressing the cause, you are addressing the symptom, and you are trying to win because of the symptom. And those failures are things that have become so loud that even legacy media has to criticize them and talk about them because this is actually just kind of getting insane at this point. And so sure enough, what on earth does Mark Carney announce today?
Canada's identity and institutions are under attack by foreign interference. And instead of defending them, Pierre Poilievre is following President Trump's lead and taking aim at our institutions like CBC, Radio-Canada. Pierre Poilievre pretends that you can keep one but not the other. But he's not Solomon. You can't split this baby. His attack on CBC is an attack directly on Radio-Canada. And it is an attack on our Canadian identity.
That is enough of that. I just want to finish essentially what Mark Carney was saying before all of the other smears thrown in there. CBC currently, by the way, receives about $1.4 billion taxpayer dollars every single year, even though the estimates have shown about 4% of Canadians tune in to their programming. And Mark Carney has said that he wants to make sure that they are fully funded.
Our plan will safeguard a reliable Canadian public square in a sea of misinformation and disinformation.
Oh, hey, it's me, misinformation and disinformation. Not because I say things that aren't true, but because you do not particularly like them. Anyway, he ended up pledging that they will increase the funding for CBC by $150 million. I thought this was really bizarre as well. The Liberal Party posted on X, Canadians in rural and remote communities rely on CBC/Radio-Canada for their news. Does Pierre Poilievre think about those people when he threatens to defund our public broadcaster? And boy, it's just like so disingenuous, so dishonest. And it's just insane, actually, because, you know, hey, hello, also, hi, it's me, misinformation, disinformation, and I also was a rural Canadian that didn't even have cell phone service for the vast majority of my life. Just going to throw that out there. And I can tell you for a fact that Canadians do not rely on CBC at all. Like there's other stations, you recognize that, right? Who have news segments that they have access to. It's 2025. Most people have access to internet. And if they don't, they have access to Starlink or something like that, which of course is a major help. It's just so bizarre to me to make it sound as though Canadians have zero options when we actually have a lot of options. And I can guarantee you that incredibly rural communities do not solely rely on the CBC for any of their information. There's other competitors. And again, Poilievre is not saying that he's going to wipe them all out. The CBC is still going to be an entity that exists. It's just not going to be publicly funded. What will that mean? Well, maybe that their CEOs will not receive such massive, massive bonuses every single year. Maybe it means that they'll actually have to focus on making good content, on finding advertisers. That's what that means. So it's so disingenuous to say it the way that he is. And also to make people disillusioned into thinking that, wow, if it weren't for CBC, all of those people in rural Canada would just be cavemen. They wouldn't know anything that's going on. Those people in rural Canada have cars. Most of them have cell phones. Most of them have the internet in some capacity. Most of them don't listen to CBC. And it's actually rather insulting to paint this picture as though if it were not for the CBC, which is apparently the Canadian identity, that all of these, oh my gosh, they would just, what on earth would they do without us? It is such a ridiculous thing to say. It's insulting. And the only reason why you are keeping on the CBC is because, of course, you are going to have allegiance to where it is that funds you. And I'm getting conspiratorial now, of course, so don't take this as fact. But also, isn't it just kind of interesting how this is exactly what Justin Trudeau ran on in 2015? By the way, he also said that he was going to be increasing the funding to the CBC while Harper said he was going to be decreasing it because there is a bias that comes from who pays your bills. But also, you have like Rosemary Barton recently who, look inside yourself, Rosie. Like, you have people from the CBC who have started to question things about the Carney Liberals because they're so big that they must be questioned. And now, right before the election, classic, you're saying, oh, hey, we're going to increase your funding. So wink, wink, nudge, nudge. You better make sure that you speak very positively about us now, because if not, then maybe Pierre Poilievre is going to win.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, it won't, my approach won't have an impact on Radio-Canada, but you know, I find it interesting that Mr. Carney is now proposing hundreds of millions of billions of dollars in additional spending. Let's be clear on this. Mr. Carney has not proposed a single penny in cost reductions in this government. He is now proposing to stack billions more costs on top of an already morbidly obese government. He was the economic advisor to Justin Trudeau while they doubled the debt, doubled housing costs, and delivered the worst inflation in 40 years. And now he says that if he's elected to a fourth Liberal term, he will make government and therefore the cost of living even more expensive. We need a change, folks. We can't go on spending money we don't have on things we don't need, or our people are going to end up with even more brutal inflation. I will be cutting waste, bureaucracy, consultants, foreign aid, and other unnecessary expenses to reduce taxes, debt, and inflation. And that's the choice in this election. Do you want a fourth Liberal term of costs and crime up and the economy down under America's thumb, or do you want a new Conservative government that will bring down the cost of living for a change?
Thank you for watching another episode of Over Opinionated. I'm Jasmine Lane. Subscribe to the channel. Give us a follow depending on where it is that you are watching this. And be sure to like the video and comment your thoughts down below. I will talk to you tomorrow.